So this is a story that goes to something that we used to talk a lot about when it was happening, and that was Bolivia, and how upset we were at the U.S. cooing Bolivia because lithium is a thing that we want, and we would like a better price on it. And the guy that was in office was like, I'd sort of like to have the proceeds go to help my people, like, do better. I've kind of increased the GDP of the country by like 400%, and I've brought a lot of people out of like abject poverty doing this. And we're like, no, we're replacing you with a fascist because we love freedom. So here we go. And this is about the New York Times, because back when this happened, we called out the New York Times for being full of shit on their take, and you can go back and find that footage wherever it may exist.
Check it out after the show.
There's a lot of videos of us complaining about this.
A lot of videos. I'm very proud.
Yes, and we're very proud because it turns out, just like we were back then, we still are right. But maybe that didn't come out the right way. We're still correct. Maybe that's a better way to put it.
I'm going to write a book called I'm Always Right.
Here we go. Ready for this. And New York Times, by the way, paper of record, wrong. Made stuff up. Let's talk about it. In November 2019, Bolivia's three-term left-wing president, Evo Morales, was basically forced out by military and police, which the U.S. had a direct hand in bribing, which is the difference between Venezuela. That's the point I kept making. I'm like, oh, the only difference is he didn't spend enough money keeping his army loyal, and the U.S. was like, well, take advantage of that, no problem. So he was officially certified as winning his fourth consecutive term. It was unsurprising. Everyone knew he was going to win. He was widely popular at home for his pragmatic economic stewardship, which was terrible words, like left. It was like he had leftist economic points of view. Horrible.
No.
Again, it doesn't say in this article, but I think he literally like cut extreme unemployment by like 75%. He was a great president by all of Bolivia's standards. Anyway, the problem that he did, the unforgivable sin, was he wouldn't give the U.S. a good price on lithium. And so for that reason, he needed to be wiped out. And that was the point, and that was the way we told the story, because that's exactly what happened. So once he was kicked out and he had to flee, Bolivia's first ever indigenous population president, who was the first indigenous member president of Bolivia, who did they replace him with? The U.S., Janine Áñez, who was from a European-descended Christian wealthy background. She has actually never been elected. She's currently the interim president. There's no elections that have been held up, and she's been there for about 7 months. And she has gone out a lot like the protests we see in America and had just them kill indigenous protesters, and then just said, you're immune. No worries, soldiers, police. No one will hit you for it. So yeah, she's basically the party that she's a part of in the last election in the Senate where they're at won 4% of the vote. So the U.S., the Freedom People, replaced a overwhelmingly popular president who was helping the people of his country with a Christian fascist dictatorship that had 4% support that has still not held elections.
None of what you just said, shocked me at all.
And so the New York Times, when this was happening, and we were yelling at them for this reason, said, oh, yeah, very reasonable. Not Evo Morales, not eligible. Definitely faked an election outcome that everyone expected to happen the way it did. Needed to be removed. America, number one. We know what we're doing. We're the New York Times. And, of course, a lot of people listened to them. And the New York Times effectively killed I don't know how many thousands of people, hundreds of people. What do you call it when you help? They get a share of the takeover. I'm not sure, but the New York Times has blood on their hands.
Well, you know what? Hey, everyone trusts that major outlet. Here's the thing, New York Times. There was once a point in your history where, you'd get calls from the establishment, threats to your reporters from these political leaders saying that, the New York Times editorial staff had to fire you guys. But now it's all about access. Now it's all about, supporting wars. And let's face it, the New York Times, they love war.
And so on that note,
they love war.
On Sunday, the New York Times realized, oh, yeah, we should probably cover our tracks so that in a year or 5 years when people call us out on helping overthrow another country, we can go, we put a correction in after all the stuff happened and it didn't matter. Anyway. So the article strongly suggested that it was the OAS audit, not the Bolivian election, that was, quote, marred with great irregularity. So if you don't remember that period of time, the entire crux of the issue was that the Bolivian government falsified an election, which is really funny, coming from the U.S., and that Morales tricked everyone with magic, and he became popular like he already was, and what
That
happened
was the magic.
the OAS, which is the Organization of American States, came in last minute with no information, was like, no, fraudulent, not legitimate. What proof do we have? I don't know. New York Times. What did they say back then? Oh, yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. We're going to cover them word for word. Anyway, so now what the New York Times saying, that it was marked with grave irregularities that make it impossible to guarantee the integrity of the data certified by the OAS claims. The paper of record, I love that there's still the paper of record, even though they record many wrong things, summarized its reporting in this way. A look at, I should do I should do New York Times voice, shouldn't I?
Yeah.
A look at the Bolivian election. That's not on the New York Times voice. I can't do a pretentious voice right now. You'll just have to imagine
You're
I'm being
doing an
pretentious.
impression of the New York Times?
Yeah, I'm trying. I just can't. I just don't. I haven't been as around as many. Anyway, Status suggests that initial analysis that the OAS raised questions of voter rigging and helped force out the president was flawed. Well, it's good of them to say this after everything's been done. To cast serious doubt on the integrity of these critical OAS reports, the Times relies upon new independent study from 3 scholars at U.S. universities, which, in the words of the New York Times, examined data obtained by the New York Times from the Bolivian election authorities. That study said the New York Times found that the Organization of American States statistical analysis was flawed, something you could have asked us when this happened, and we would have said the same thing. The study documented that the key irregularity cited by the OAS was actually an artifact of the analysis error. So they just screwed up. They didn't do it correctly. And we were like, yeah, we could have asked us that like months ago. We would have said the same thing. It further explained that that with regard to new patterns that the observed deemed inexcusable, the new data analysis shows we can explain without invoking fraud. So what the New York Times is basically saying, and this it's a small tome that they wrote out, is they're trying to explain themselves for having blood on their hands, all this blood on their hands. They keep adding blood to their hands. Is like we made an oopsie, and that oopsie led to the overthrow of a democratically elected country and installed a fascist a religious dictatorship in there, and we sort of let it happen and said it was a good thing, following information that was so obviously backed by the U.S. wanting to do a coup, but we just had to keep our sources together. So New York Times, you murdered people with your reporting. Thank you.
And
Yeah.
they don't care. It's all about access.
Daniel,
Kira.
did you say they came out on Sunday with that? Because this article that we read from is from The Intercept.
Yeah.
And so they came out on Sunday and to correct this record and say, oh, actually there wasn't any fraud.
Yeah.
So Sunday isn't a really big news day, is it?
Kind of where you want to hide stuff.
Yeah, exactly. And so I don't know. I just get suspicious about stuff like that. It's like, why aren't they coming out and correcting the record at the top of their shows on primetime news? It's like, come on, you're not actually trying here.
Actually,
we all know that.
Actually, I want to make a comment that
Go
go
they
ahead.
just want to say it so that if you call them out at some point in time, they go, we had a retraction.
Yeah, so
matter,
so
it was
so,
like years
so they
past
so they can
it.
do that all the time. They could have someone else edit the article when someone says, "Oh, maybe Tulsi Gabbard's a Russian agent," and then edit Russian into Republican. They can, support any kind of regime change war. They can cover the tracks up for any of the political elite. They can nominate 2 horribly flawed individuals, Elizabeth Warren and Amy Klobuchar, to get the Democratic nomination. Because they can't make a choice for themselves. They are a newspaper outlet that has failed numerous times. But I'm proud to say this. Whenever Hard Lens Media has made a mistake, we do quickly, like the next day, correct our mistake, and we continue to move on to give you guys the real truth. Because obviously the New York Times doesn't care. There was one point in their history where they actually did believe in journalism, but they're going to have to live with the fact knowing that they helped support a coup and innocent lives were lost because of their failure to follow journalistic integrity. And that's that.
It
And
must
I'm
be
also
so.
wondering when we're getting our coup.
Yeah, it must be
for
so
all of
easy.
the election fraud.
It must be so easy to just make a huge stance on something and then come out with a correction on a Sunday whenever no one cares and just be like, oh well, we actually don't believe that anymore. But you can look at our correction, right?
And
It's
that's
fine.
the thing. It's like
They shouldn't be allowed to get away
it's
with
like,
it.
oh, you're making a correction at the last minute after everything's said and done. It's not like this correction will change anything. They already affected everything. It's like, it's like when we're talking about police and everything in the last few weeks. It's like police shoot you and they're like, "Oh, I'm sorry. I actually meant to hit the guy behind you. Sorry, you don't have a heart now because I shot it."
Yeah.
I mean, it's like I'm sorry, buddy. I didn't mean it. So are we cool? Oh, you're dead. Never mind.
Right,
Ask
right,
your
right.
family.
Yeah.